He pointed a finger in her face, his voice dripping with arrogance. "Listen to me, and listen closely. I don't care who you think you are, or how much you think you paid for this ticket. My plane, my rules. You are moving to the back right now, or I will have security drag you off this tarmac." Captain Richard Sterling thought he was clearing the way for a VIP asserting his dominance over a woman in a faded hoodie who didn't look like she belonged in first class. He had no idea that the woman he was screaming at wasn't just a passenger. She was the one who signed his paychecks, and she was about to teach him a lesson that would cost him everything. The rain battered against the glass walls of Terminal 4 at JFK International Airport, creating a grey, rhythmic backdrop to the chaos inside. For Elena Vance, the noise was almost comforting. It was white noise, drowning out the endless stream of business calls, merger negotiations and board meetings that had consumed her life for the last 6 months. Eleanor adjusted the oversized charcoal grey hoodie she was wearing, pulling the sleeves down over her hands. To anyone passing by, she looked like a tired college student, or perhaps a weary traveler trying to catch a standby flight home. She wore no makeup. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and her sneakers were scuffed from weeks of travel. There was no telltale glimmer of diamonds on her fingers, no flashy designer logo on her canvas tote bag. She liked it that way. In reality, Elena Vance was the majority shareholder and CEO of Vance Global, a conglomerate with tentacles in tech shipping, and as of 3 weeks ago, aviation. She had quietly acquired Meridian Air, a struggling luxury airline, with the intention of revamping its image. Today was her first field test, an undercover flight on Meridian's flagship route from New York to London. She wanted to see the service from the customer's perspective without the red carpet that usually rolled out when people knew her name. She glanced at her boarding pass. Seat 1A. First class. "Finally," she whispered, stepping up to the gate. The gate agent, a young woman who looked like she'd been working a double shift, barely glanced up as she scanned Eleanor's pass. The machine beeped green. Elena walked down the jet bridge, the cool air of the tunnel hitting her face. She was looking forward to a glass of champagne, a warm blanket, and 7 hours of absolute silence. But as she stepped onto the plane, the atmosphere shifted. The flight attendant at the door, whose name tag read Jessica, offered a tight, practiced smile that didn't reach her eyes. Her gaze raked over Elena's hoodie and scuffed sneakers, lingering for a second too long on the fraying hem of her jeans. "Boarding pass?" Jessica asked, her tone clipped even though Elena had just scanned it at the gate. Elena handed it over without a word. Jessica squinted at the ticket, then back at Elena. "Seat 1A. Are you sure?" "It's what the ticket says," Elena replied calmly, taking the stub back. "Right. Well, the aisle is to your left." Jessica gestured vaguely immediately, turning her attention to the passenger behind Elena, a man in a sharp, bespoke suit. Her voice instantly transformed into a purr. "Welcome aboard, sir. Let me take your coat. Right this way." Elena suppressed a sigh and found her seat. The first-class cabin on the Meridian 707 was impressive sleek leather pods, massive entertainment screens, and gold-trimmed accents. She stowed her canvas bag and settled into the plush leather of 1A. She closed her eyes, ready to disconnect. "Excuse me." The voice was sharp, intrusive. Elena opened her eyes. Jessica was standing over her, her hands clasped in front of her uniform, looking uncomfortable but determined. "Yes. There's been a complication," Jessica said. "We have a bit of a seating overlap. I'm going to need to see your boarding pass again." Eleanor frowned, but reached into her pocket and produced the pass. I don't see how there can be an overlap. I booked this seat 2 weeks ago. Jessica barely looked at the paper. Yes, well, unfortunately our system shows a double booking for seat 1A, and since we have a priority platinum member boarding shortly protocol, dictates that we prioritize their reservation. Eleanor sat up straighter. Priority platinum. I paid full fare for this ticket, and I'm already seated. I understand that, ma'am, Jessica said, her voice dripping with condescension. But the other passenger is a very important client of Meridian Air. We have a seat available in Economy Plus. It has extra legroom. It's quite comfortable. You want me to move from first class, which I paid for, to economy, because someone important is coming? Elena asked, her voice steady but hardening. That's not how contracts work. I have a ticket. Jessica let out a dramatic sigh as if Elena was being unreasonably difficult. Ma'am, please don't make a scene. It's standard procedure. It's not standard procedure to downgrade a paying customer because you overbooked, Elena countered. I'm staying right here. Jessica's face flushed. She tapped her earpiece. Captain, we have a situation in first class. Seat 1A is refusing to cooperate. Elena watched her, unbelieving. She had read the Meridian Air Operational Handbook cover to cover last week during the acquisition. There was absolutely no policy that allowed for this. In fact, it was explicitly forbidden to displace seated passengers for VIPs without offering significant compensation, thousands of dollars, and voluntary movement. A moment later, the cockpit door opened. Captain Richard Sterling stepped out. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered with silver-streaked hair, and a jawline that looked like it had been chiseled out of granite. He wore his uniform with the pride of a general, 4 gold stripes gleaming on his shoulders. He radiated authority, but also a palpable sense of arrogance. He walked over to seat 1A, his heavy boots thudding against the carpet. He didn't look at Elena at first. He looked at Jessica. What's the problem here? Sterling asked, his voice a low baritone that carried through the silent cabin. She won't move, Captain, Jessica said, pointing an accusatory finger at Elena. I explained the conflict with Mr. Harrington's reservation, but she's refusing to vacate the seat. Sterling finally turned his eyes to Elena. His gaze was cold, dismissive. He saw the hoodie. He saw the messy hair. He saw a nobody. Miss, Sterling said, skipping the pleasantries. We have a flight to catch. I don't have time for games. Grab your bag and follow the flight attendant to row 24. Eleanor looked up at him, her expression unreadable. Captain Sterling, is it? She read from his wings. I have a valid ticket for this seat. I'm not moving. I don't think you understand. Sterling leaned down, invading her personal space. This isn't a negotiation. This is my aircraft. I determine who flies and where they sit. Now you can walk back to row 24, or I can have airport security escort you off the plane entirely. Your choice. Elena felt the heat rise in her cheeks, not from embarrassment, but from a simmering anger she hadn't felt in years. She had built her empire by outsmarting men, like sterling men who thought a loud voice and a fancy title were a substitute for competence and respect. On what grounds? Elena asked calmly. I haven't been disruptive. I haven't been intoxicated. I hold a valid ticket. If you remove me, you are violating federal aviation regulations and Meridian Air's own conditions of carriage. Section 4, paragraph 2. Sterling blinked momentarily, thrown off by her specific citation of the rulebook. But his ego quickly paved over the doubt. He let out a dry, mocking chuckle. A lawyer, he sneered, looking back at Jessica. "We've got a jailhouse lawyer on board. Listen, sweetheart, quoting the rule book doesn't change the reality. The reality is that Mr. Charles Harrington is boarding this plane in 3 minutes. Mr. Harrington is a personal friend of the airline's regional director. He needs privacy. He needs this seat. You, on the other hand..." He looked her up and down with open disdain. "You look like you scraped together your savings for a lucky upgrade. Take the economy seat. Save yourself the embarrassment." "It wasn't an upgrade," Elena said icily. "I don't care," Sterling snapped. "Last chance." Just then the commotion at the front of the cabin grew louder. A man swept through the curtains, followed by an entourage of 2 assistants carrying garment bags. Charles Harrington was everything Elena despised about the corporate world. He was in his 50s, wearing a suit that cost more than most cars, with a face flushed red from too much scotch and too little patience. He was holding a phone to his ear, barking orders. "I don't care about the supply chain. Just fire them if they can't deliver. Cut them loose," Harrington shouted into the phone, ending the call aggressively as he looked around the cabin. He stopped when he saw Sterling, standing by seat 1A. "Richard," Harrington boomed, a fake jovial smile plastering onto his face. "Good to see you, Captain. Hope you're ready to get us to London ahead of schedule. I've got a dinner reservation at the Shard." "Mr. Harrington." Sterling's demeanor changed instantly. He was obsequious, practically bowing. "Always a pleasure. We're just clearing up a minor housekeeping issue." Harrington looked down at Elena, his lip curling. "Is this the issue? Is she in my seat?" "She was just leaving," Sterling said, shooting a glare at Elena that promised retribution if she spoke. Harrington laughed, a wet, unpleasant sound. "Well, chop chop. I need to review some files. And get this." He waved a hand near Elena's hoodie. "This smell out of here smells like the subway." The other passengers in first class were watching now. Some looked uncomfortable, burying their faces in magazines. Others looked annoyed at the delay. No one spoke up. Elena looked at Harrington, then at Sterling. She realized that fighting this physically would only result in her being dragged off the plane in handcuffs. That wouldn't serve her purpose. She needed to see how deep this rot went. She needed to see exactly how Captain Sterling treated people he thought were beneath him when he thought no one of consequence was watching. She stood up slowly. "Fine," Elena said. Her voice was quiet, but it carried a weight that made Jessica flinch slightly. "I'll move." Sterling smirked, crossing his arms. "Smart girl. Jessica, get her bag." "I can manage," Elena said, grabbing her canvas tote. She stepped out into the aisle, standing toe-to-toe with Harrington. Harrington didn't even move to let her pass. She had to squeeze by him, brushing against the galley wall. "Make sure you wipe down the seat, Jessica," Harrington quipped loudly as he threw his briefcase onto the seat Elena had just vacated. "God knows where she's been." Sterling laughed. Actually laughed. "Don't worry, Mr. Harrington. We'll take good care of you. Top-shelf service, as always." Elena walked down the aisle, the long walk of shame. She passed the business class section, then the partition into economy. The difference was stark. The air was stuffier, the seats smaller. She found row 24. It wasn't even economy plus as promised. It was a middle seat in the standard economy section, sandwiched between a teenager listening to loud music and a mother with a crying infant. Elena sat down, shoving her bag under the seat in front of her. She pulled her phone out. Her hands were trembling, not from fear, but from adrenaline. She opened a secure messaging app and typed a message to her Chief of Operations, Marcus Thorne. Thorn. I'm on flight MA402 to London. There's been a change of plans. Do not, I repeat, do not have the acquisition team meet me at the hotel. Have them meet me on the tarmac at Heathrow. Bring the full legal team, and bring the termination papers for a Captain Richard Sterling. She hit send. Then she opened the camera on her phone. She angled it discreetly towards the front of the cabin, though she couldn't see first class from here. She needed evidence. A few minutes later, the plane taxied to the runway. The intercom crackled to life. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. Welcome aboard Flight 402 to London. We apologize for the slight delay at the gate. We had to handle a minor passenger issue to ensure the comfort of our priority guests. We're number 1 for takeoff. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the Meridian standard of excellence. Elena put her headphones on, but she didn't play music. She sat in the cramped seat, her knees pressing against the tray table, and waited. The flight was 7 hours long. That was 7 hours for Sterling to dig his grave a little deeper, and she was going to hand him the shovel. As the plane climbed to cruising altitude, the seatbelt sign flicked off. The service carts began to roll. Elena watched as the flight attendants moved through the cabin. Jessica, the one from the front, was working the economy cart, now likely demoted to help with the rush. When Jessica reached Elena's row, she didn't offer a drink. She simply leaned in her voice a harsh whisper. "You're lucky the captain is in a good mood. If it were up to me, you'd be blacklisted. Don't press the call button. Don't ask for extras. You sit there and you stay quiet. Got it?" Elena looked up, her brown eyes sharp as flint. "I'll keep that in mind, Jessica. By the way, what is your last name?" "That's none of your business," Jessica snapped, slamming a small bag of pretzels onto Elena's tray table before moving to the next row. Elena smiled. It was a cold, terrifying smile. "It will be," she whispered to herself. 3 hours into the flight over the dark, churning Atlantic, the atmosphere in economy was stifling. The air conditioning seemed to be struggling, leaving the cabin warm and smelling faintly of stale coffee and damp coats. Eleanor shifted in her seat, her back aching. The irony wasn't lost on her. She owned the $300 million aircraft she was flying in, yet she was currently sandwiched between a stranger's elbow and a wall, unable to feel her left foot. But her physical discomfort was secondary to the growing fury in her chest as she observed the crew. To her right, the young mother whose name she learned was Sarah was on the verge of tears. Her 6-month-old baby, Leo, had been fussy for the last hour. Sarah was exhausted, her eyes rimmed with red, rocking the infant back and forth while whispering desperate apologies to the passengers around her. "I'm so sorry," Sarah whispered to Elena, her voice cracking. "He's hungry. I ran out of warm water for his formula, and cold water gives him a stomachache. I've pressed the call button 3 times, but—" She gestured to the illuminated orange light above their row. It had been on for 45 minutes. Elena unbuckled her seatbelt. "I'll handle it." "No, please, that stewardess Jessica, she's terrifying," Sarah said, clutching Leo tighter. "I don't want to cause trouble." "You aren't causing trouble, Sarah. You paid for a service. Basic humanity is included in the ticket price, or at least it should be." Elena squeezed out of the row and walked to the rear galley. The curtains were drawn, but she could hear laughter from behind them. She pulled the curtain back. Jessica and another male flight attendant, a guy named Mark with gelled hair and a bored expression, were leaning against the counters, scrolling through their phones and eating chocolates from a box that was clearly marked "First Class Only." They stopped laughing when they saw Elena. Jessica's face twisted into a scowl. "I told you to stay in your seat," Jessica snapped, dropping a chocolate wrapper on the floor. "The seatbelt sign is, Well, it's off, but we're on a break. The passenger in 24B has had her call light on for nearly an hour. Elena said, her voice calm but authoritative. She needs warm water for a baby's formula. It's a medical necessity for an infant. Jessica rolled her eyes, sharing a look with Mark. We're out of warm water in the back. The heater is on the fritz. Tell her to use the tap in the lavatory. The lavatory water isn't potable, Elena said, her jaw tightening. You know that. It's unsafe for an infant. Look, lady, Mark chimed in, crossing his arms. We don't control the plumbing. If she wanted premium service, she should have booked a better seat. Now go sit down before we write you up for interfering with flight crew duties. Elena stared at them. She saw the laziness, the entitlement, the complete lack of empathy. These were the people representing her brand. Meridian Air was supposed to be the pinnacle of elegance, and instead it was being run like a frat house at 30,000 feet. There is hot water in first class, Elena stated. I saw the tea service being prepped before you kicked me out. Go get a cup of hot water from the front galley. Jessica laughed, a harsh barking sound. You want me to walk all the way to the front, disturb Captain Sterling and Mr. Harrington, just to get water for a crying baby in economy? You're delusional. Go sit down. Now. Elena didn't move. She stepped fully into the galley, grabbing a clean paper cup from the stack. Hey, what are you doing? Mark shouted, stepping forward to block her. If you won't do your job, I will, Elena said. I'm going to the front to get the water myself. Jessica moved faster than Elena expected. She grabbed Elena's arm, her fingernails digging into the fabric of the hoodie. You are not going up there. Captain Sterling gave strict orders. No riffraff in the front cabin. You step through that curtain and we restrain you. Do you understand? Plastic cuffs, right here in the galley. Elena looked down at Jessica's hand on her arm. Let go of me. Sit. Down, Jessica hissed. Elena pulled her arm free with a sharp tug. She looked at the two of them, memorizing their faces, their employee numbers. She realized that forcing her way to the front now would likely result in a physical altercation, and Sterling would use that as an excuse to divert the plane or have her arrested before she could execute her plan. She needed to be smarter. Fine, Elena said, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. I'll sit. But remember this moment. Remember that you refused water to a baby. She grabbed a bottle of room-temperature water from the cart, ignoring Mark's protest, and turned back. She walked back to seat 24B. They wouldn't give it, Sarah asked, looking defeated. Here, Elena said, handing her the bottle. I'm sorry. Put the bottle under your armpit for a few minutes. Body heat will warm it up enough to mix. It's the best we can do right now. Sarah looked at Elena with gratitude in her tear-filled eyes. Thank you. You're very kind. I don't know why they are being so mean to you. They think they have power, Elena said, staring at the back of the seat in front of her. They think that because they have a uniform and a badge, they matter more than you. But power is a funny thing, Sarah. It can vanish in a second. Elena pulled out her phone again. She opened her notes app and began a new entry. Log 3 crew negligence. Denied water to infant. Threat of physical restraint for requesting basic supplies. Flight attendants Jessica Miller and Mark Davies to be terminated immediately upon wheels down. She closed her eyes, trying to rest, but the image of Harrington in her seat, laughing while this mother struggled, burned in her mind. The karma was coming. She just had to wait for the landing gear to drop. 2 hours before landing, the dynamic on the plane shifted from uncomfortable to volatile. Charles Harrington, The VIP in seat 1A had apparently made good use of the unlimited premium scotch. His loud, booming laughter had been drifting back from the first-class cabin for hours, piercing the thin curtain that separated the classes. But now he was on the move. Elena was reading a book on her phone when the curtain to business class was ripped open. Harrington stumbled through a half-empty glass of amber liquid in his hand. His tie was loosened, his face a deep, blotchy crimson. He wasn't walking with a purpose. He was prowling. "Legs are cramping," he announced to no one in particular, his speech slurring slightly. "Need to walk. See how the other half lives, eh?" He swayed down the aisle of economy, bumping into shoulders and seatbacks. He didn't apologize. He just chuckled. When he reached row 24, he stopped. He peered down, squinting until his eyes locked on Elena. "Well, well, well," Harrington sneered, leaning heavily on the headrest of the seat in front of her, waking up the teenager sleeping there. "If it isn't the little stowaway, the seat thief." Elena didn't look up from her phone. "Go back to your seat, Mr. Harrington. You're drunk." "Drunk?" Harrington laughed, splashing a bit of his drink onto the floor. "I'm celebrating. Just closed a deal that's worth more than everyone on this plane combined will make in a lifetime. I can be as drunk as I want. I own this town. I practically own this airline." "You don't own anything," Elena said, finally looking up. Her gaze was steady, piercing. "You're a passenger, just like everyone else." Harrington's smile vanished. He leaned in closer, his breath reeking of alcohol. "You got a mouth on you, girl. I don't like it. You know I did Richard a favor by not having you thrown off back in New York. I could have snapped my fingers and you'd be on a no-fly list." Just then, baby Leo let out a soft whimper. The noise seemed to irritate Harrington instantly. He glared at Sarah. "Shut that thing up," he snapped. "I'm trying to have a conversation." Sarah shrank back, terrified. I'm sorry, sir." "Don't apologize to him," Elena said firmly, unbuckling her seatbelt and standing up. She wasn't tall, but in that aisle she stood like a titan. She positioned herself between Harrington and the mother. "Mr. Harrington, you are harassing passengers. Go back to your seat immediately." "Or what?" Harrington challenged, stepping into her personal space. "You going to make me you and your Walmart hoodie?" "Is there a problem here?" The voice came from behind Harrington. It was Captain Sterling. He had emerged from the cockpit, likely alerted by Jessica that the VIP was wandering. Sterling looked at the scene, Harrington swaying and aggressive Elena standing her ground, the terrified mother. A competent captain would have de-escalated the drunk passenger. Sterling, however, did the opposite. "She bothering you, Mr. Harrington?" Sterling asked, placing a reassuring hand on the drunk man's shoulder. "She's threatening me, Richard," Harrington lied, pointing a shaking finger at Elena. "I came back here to use the restroom, because the front one is occupied, and she started screaming at me. Verbal assault. I feel unsafe." It was a lie so blatant it was almost funny. But Sterling didn't care about the truth. He cared about the man who promised to put in a good word for him with the regional director. Sterling turned on Elena, his face contorted with rage. "I warned you. I told you specifically not to cause trouble." "He is drunk and harassing a mother and child," Elena said, her voice ringing out clearly in the silent cabin. "He is the safety threat. You are required by law to restrain an intoxicated passenger who is threatening others. Do your job, Captain." The entire economy cabin was watching now. Phones were raised, cameras recording. Sterling saw the phones, but his arrogance blinded him to the danger. He thought he was untouchable. He stepped closer to Eleanor, towering over her. "You don't tell me my job," Sterling spat. "You have been nothing but a disruption since you stepped on this plane. You refused a direct order to move seats. You tried to force your way into the galley, and now you're assaulting a VIP guest." "Assaulting?" Elena raised an eyebrow. "I haven't touched him." "It's your word against his," Sterling said, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. "And his word is gold. Yours is worthless." Sterling pulled a pair of plastic flex cuffs from his pocket. He had evidently brought them with him, anticipating a fight. "Turn around," Sterling ordered. "I'm placing you under arrest for interfering with a flight crew and endangering flight safety." The cabin gasped. "You're making a mistake," Elena said softly. She didn't resist, but she didn't turn around. "A mistake that will end your career." "Turn around," Sterling shouted, grabbing her shoulder and spinning her. He wrenched her wrists behind her back and zip-tied them tight. The plastic bit into her skin. "Jessica!" Sterling yelled. Jessica appeared instantly, looking gleeful. "Take Mr. Harrington back to first class. Get him another drink." "On the house," Sterling ordered. Then he shoved Elena down into her seat. "As for you, you stay there. I'm radioing Heathrow police. They'll be meeting us at the gate. You're going straight to a cell." Harrington laughed as he was led away. "Enjoy jail, sweetheart. Maybe they'll give you a better outfit." Sterling leaned down one last time, his face inches from Elena's. "You picked the wrong person to mess with. You're a nobody. Remember that." He turned and marched back to the cockpit, slamming the curtain shut. Elena sat in the cramped seat, her hands bound behind her back. Her shoulders ached, and the humiliation was burning her skin. Sarah was crying silently beside her, terrified. "I'm so sorry," Sarah whispered. "This is all my fault." Elena took a deep breath, forcing her heart rate to slow. She looked at Sarah and offered a small, calm smile. "It's not your fault, Sarah, and don't worry about me." Elena looked at the back of the seat, where she had tucked her phone. It was still recording. "He thinks he's radioing the police," Elena whispered more to herself than anyone else. "But he just radioed his own executioner." She shifted her position, wincing as the cuffs dug in. She had about 90 minutes left of this nightmare. But when those doors opened at Heathrow, the power dynamic was going to shift so violently that Captain Sterling wouldn't even know what hit him until the ground was rushing up to meet him. "Just wait," she whispered. "Just wait." The descent into London Heathrow was turbulent, the plane buffeting against layers of thick grey clouds that seemed to mirror the mood inside the cabin. For the last 90 minutes of the flight, Eleanor Vance had sat in silence, her hands still bound tightly behind her back with the plastic flex cuffs. The circulation to her thumbs was beginning to cut off, sending sharp pins and needles shooting up her arms. But she refused to complain. She refused to give Captain Sterling the satisfaction of hearing her whimper. Beside her, Sarah had finally managed to get baby Leo to sleep, but the young mother was vibrating with anxiety. She kept glancing at Elena's bound wrists, then up at the call button, terrified that the crew might return. "You don't deserve this," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible over the roar of the engines. "I recorded it. I recorded everything he said to you. If you need a witness, I'll give them the video." Elena turned her head, offering a tired but genuine smile. "Keep that video safe, Sarah. You might be the most important person on this plane when we land." The intercom chimed. Captain Sterling's voice filled the cabin, smooth and dangerously confident. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are beginning our final approach into London Heathrow. We expect to be on the ground in 15 minutes. I'd like to apologize once again for the disturbance in the economy cabin earlier. At Meridian, air safety is our top priority, and we have zero tolerance for unruly passengers who threaten our VIP guests. Local authorities have been notified and will be meeting the aircraft to handle the situation. Please remain seated until the seatbelt sign is turned off." A ripple of murmurs went through the economy cabin. People were craning their necks to look at Eleanor. Some looks were sympathetic, realizing the injustice they had witnessed. Others, those who hadn't seen the confrontation, looked at her with suspicion, buying into the captain's narrative that the small woman in the hoodie was a danger to the flight. As the wheels touched down on the wet tarmac with a screech of rubber, Eleanor felt a strange sense of calm settle over her. The game was almost over. The plane taxied for what felt like an eternity. Usually, first-class passengers would be up and gathering their bags before the plane even came to a complete stop. But today, the crew was blocking the aisles. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated," Jessica announced, standing at the front of the economy section like a prison warden. "We are waiting for police to board the aircraft to escort a passenger off." Through the window, Elena saw the flashing blue lights of police cruisers reflecting off the wet pavement. But behind the cruisers, she saw something else. 3 black SUVs with tinted windows parked right next to the jet bridge stairs. Sterling clearly didn't notice the SUVs. He only saw the police. The cabin door opened. 2 Metropolitan Police officers stepped onto the plane, their yellow, high-visibility jackets stark against the muted tones of the aircraft interior. Captain Sterling was there to greet them, his hat tucked under his arm, his chest puffed out. "Officers," Sterling said, shaking the lead officer's hand. "Thank you for coming so quickly. The suspect is in seat 24B. I've already restrained her. She was verbally abusive, threatened a high-profile client, and refused crew instructions. I want to press full charges for endangering a flight." "Understood, Captain," the officer said, his face professional and stern. "We'll remove her immediately." Sterling led the officers down the aisle, marching past the business-class passengers who were watching with morbid curiosity. When they reached row 24, Sterling pointed a gloved finger at Elena. "That's her," he said, his voice dripping with disdain. "Get her off my plane." The officer looked at Elena. He saw a small woman, exhausted, dressed in a hoodie, with her hands bound behind her back. He looked at Sarah, clutching the baby next to her. It didn't look like the scene of a violent crime, but the captain's word was law in the air. "Miss," the officer said, reaching for Elena's arm. "You're under arrest. Come with us quietly." Eleanor stood up. Her legs were stiff. She didn't struggle. She let the officer guide her into the aisle. As she was marched toward the front of the plane, she passed Harrington in 1A. He was gathering his things, looking smug. "Bye-bye, trouble," Harrington jeered, raising a glass of champagne in a mock toast. "Hope you like prison food." Sterling stood by the exit door, arms crossed, a victor, surveying his conquest. As Elena passed him, he leaned in one last time. "I told you," he whispered, his eyes cold and dead. "You're a nobody, and I am the captain. Don't ever forget your place." Elena stopped. She looked Sterling dead in the eye. "I won't," she said. "And you won't either." The officers pushed her forward out of the plane and onto the jet bridge. The cold London air hit her face, a sharp contrast to the stuffy cabin. They walked her down the metal stairs toward the waiting police car. Sterling followed them out, eager to see her stuffed into the back of a squad car. He stood at the top of the stairs, watching, savoring the moment. But as they reached the tarmac, the back door of the lead black SUV opened. A man stepped out. He was tall, wearing a suit that cost more than Sterling's annual salary, and he moved with the predatory grace of a shark. It was Marcus Thorne, the chief of operations for Vance Global. Behind him were 2 other men, senior legal counsel for the conglomerate. Thorne didn't look at the police. He looked straight at Elena. His face went pale when he saw the zip ties on her wrists. "Stop!" Thorne barked. His voice was like a thunderclap, echoing across the tarmac. The police officers paused, surprised by the authority in the man's voice. "Who are you?" the lead officer asked. Thorne ignored him. He walked straight up to Elena. "Ms. Vance. My God." He turned on the police officer, his eyes blazing. "You have exactly 3 seconds to cut those restraints off her wrists before I have your badge and a lawsuit filed against your department that will bankrupt this precinct." The officer blinked. "Sir, this is a suspect in a flight safety incident. Captain Sterling ordered her arrest." "Captain Sterling," Thorne spat the name like it was poison, "is an employee. She," he gestured to Elena, "is the owner of the airline." Silence descended on the tarmac, heavier than the fog. The police officer looked at Thorne, then down at Elena in her scruffy hoodie, then back at Thorne. "The owner—" "Cut them off," Elena said. Her voice was no longer quiet. It was the voice that had commanded boardrooms across 3 continents. The officer hesitated, then pulled out a multi-tool and snipped the plastic cuffs. Elena rubbed her wrists where angry red welts had formed. She winced, but the pain only sharpened her focus. Up on the metal stairs of the jet bridge, Captain Sterling was watching the scene unfold with confusion. He couldn't hear what was being said, but he saw the police release her. He saw the man in the suit bowing his head to her. "What is going on down there?" Sterling shouted from the stairs. "Officer, why are you releasing her? I said arrest her." Eleanor looked up at the stairs. She adjusted her hoodie, pulled her shoulders back, and walked toward the stairs. Thorne and the legal team fell in step behind her, a phalanx of power. "Mr. Thorne," Elena said, not looking back, "bring the termination papers." "They are ready, Ms. Vance," Thorne replied. Elena walked up the stairs right back to where Sterling was standing. The captain looked confused, his bravado wavering for the first time. "What do you think you're doing?" Sterling demanded as she reached the top platform. "Get back in the police car." Elena ignored him. She stepped past him back into the aircraft. "Excuse me," Sterling yelled, grabbing her shoulder. Thorne intercepted his hand before it could touch her again. Thorne's grip was iron. "Touch her again, and you will leave this airport in a stretcher. Do you understand?" Sterling recoiled, shocked. "Who the hell are you?" "I'm the man who signs your checks," Thorne said. "Or rather, I was." Elena walked into the first-class cabin. Harrington was still there, struggling to zip his bag, annoyed by the delay. Jessica and Mark were standing by the galley, looking out the window, confused by the commotion. Elena stood at the front of the cabin. She turned to face the crew and the first-class passengers. "Ladies and gentlemen," Elena announced. Her voice wasn't loud, but it commanded absolute silence. "Can I have your attention, please?" Harrington looked up, his face flushing red. "You again. Why aren't you in handcuffs?" "Because," Elena said, looking at him with a mix of pity and disgust, "you can't arrest the person who owns the plane." Harrington froze. "What?" Elena reached into her tote bag, the canvas one Sterling had mocked, and pulled out a sleek black leather folder. She opened it and held up the acquisition documents, stamped with the official seals of the Aviation Authority. "My name is Eleanor Vance," she said, "CEO of Vance Global, and as of 3 weeks ago, the new owner of Meridian Air." You could hear a pin drop. Jessica's face drained of color. She grabbed the galley counter to steady herself. Mark dropped the magazine he was holding. Sterling, who had followed them back onto the plane, stood in the doorway, his mouth agape. "Vance, no. That's... You're wearing a hoodie." "I am." Elena said, turning her gaze to him. I wanted to see how my employees treat people when they think no one important is watching, and I found out. She walked over to Sterling. The height difference didn't matter anymore. She loomed over him emotionally. Captain Richard Sterling, she said, her voice steady and cold. You violated federal aviation regulations by removing a seated passenger without due cause. You failed to intervene when a passenger was harassing a mother and child. You falsified a police report claiming I was the aggressor, and you physically assaulted your employer. Sterling stammered, sweat breaking out on his forehead. Ms. Vance, I didn't know. If I had known it was you, that is exactly the point. Eleanor shouted, her voice finally cracking with the rage she had held back for 7 hours. If you had known it was me, you would have treated me like royalty. But because you thought I was poor, because you thought I was weak, you treated me like garbage. You judged a book by its cover, and you burned the library down. She held out her hand. Thorne slapped a document into it. This is a formal notice of termination, Eleanor said, shoving the paper against Sterling's chest. You are barred, effective immediately. You are stripped of your rank. You will not fly for Meridian Air, and I will personally ensure that the report I file with the FAA regarding your conduct today makes it impossible for you to ever sit in a cockpit again. Sterling looked at the paper, his hands shaking. You can't do this. I have 20 years. Get off my plane, Elena said softly. But, get off my plane, she screamed. Sterling flinched. He looked around the cabin. His crew looked away. The passengers were staring. He was stripped bare. He turned, clutching his termination letter, and walked off the jet bridge. His shoulders slumped, a broken man. Eleanor turned to the galley. Jessica was crying now, mascara running down her cheeks. Mark was staring at his shoes. Jessica Miller. Mark Davies. Elena listed their names from memory. You denied water to a hungry infant. You mocked a passenger. You abused your power because you were too lazy to do your jobs. Please, Miss Vance, Jessica sobbed. I need this job. I have rent. Sarah in seat 24B needed water. Eleanor countered. She needed help. You gave her scorn. Hand over your badges. Miss Vance, badges now. Trembling, Jessica and Mark unpinned their wings and handed them over. Escort them off, Eleanor said to Thorne, and make sure they don't take any company property. Finally, Elena turned to seat 1A. Charles Harrington was pale, but his arrogance hadn't fully evaporated. He tried to laugh it off. Well, Miss Vance, quite a show. Look, I'm a businessman. I understand stress. Maybe I had a bit too much to drink. Let's not let this affect the contract between our companies, eh? Elena smiled. It was the scariest look anyone had seen on her face yet. Mr. Harrington, do you know why I was flying to London? I was coming to sign the final supply chain agreement with Harrington Logistics. Harrington's eyes widened. Yes, exactly. $100 million contract. We're partners. Not anymore, Eleanor said. She pulled out her phone and dialed a number on speaker. Connect me to legal, she said. Yes, Miss Vance, a voice answered. Cancel the Harrington deal. Invoke the morality clause. The CEO just publicly disgraced himself and harassed passengers on a Meridian flight. I want the contract shredded. Understood, Miss Vance. Terminating now. Harrington stood up, panic setting in. You can't do that. That deal is my company's entire Q3 projection. If you pull out our stock, we'll tank. You should have thought about that before you demanded my seat, Eleanor said. You wanted to know how the other half lives, Charles. Well, now you're going to find out. Because without this deal, you're going to be flying economy a lot more often. She pointed to the door. Get out! Harrington grabbed his bag, sputtering protests, but Thorne stepped forward, looking ready to throw him out physically. Harrington fled. The cabin was silent. Elena took a deep breath. She smoothed down her hoodie. She walked back through the curtain past business class, back to economy. The passengers were watching her with awe. She stopped at row 24. Sarah was looking up at her eyes wide. You own the airline? Sarah asked. Elena smiled, and this time it was warm. I do, and I'm going to make some changes, starting with you. She pulled a card from her pocket. Sarah, I'm refunding your ticket, and I'm giving you a lifetime pass for first-class travel on Meridian for you and your son. No one will ever treat you like that again. Sarah burst into tears. Thank you. Thank you so much. Elena looked around the cabin. And for everyone else in economy, drinks are on the house while we wait for the new crew to arrive. I'm sorry for the delay. The cabin erupted in applause. Elena walked back to the front, finally sitting down in seat 1A. She looked out the window at the rain. She was exhausted. Her wrists hurt, and she had a headache. But as she watched Sterling's retreating figure on the tarmac below walking alone in the rain, she knew one thing for sure. Karma had arrived, and it had flown first class. The fallout from flight MA402 didn't end on the tarmac at Heathrow. In the age of the internet, nothing stays quiet for long, especially when a billionaire CEO takes down a tyrant in real time. 3 days after the incident, the video Sarah had secretly recorded from seat 24B was leaked to the press. It wasn't Elena who released it. She didn't need the publicity, but Sarah's sister had uploaded it with the caption, "Pilot tries to arrest woman for protecting a baby. Turns out she owns the airline." The video amassed 40 million views in 48 hours. The world watched in crisp high definition as Captain Richard Sterling sneered at a woman in a hoodie, flex-cuffed her without cause, and then watched his career disintegrate in seconds when Marcus Thorne stepped out of that black SUV. The clip of Elena shouting, "Get off my plane!" became a global rallying cry, a meme and a symbol of justice against corporate bullying. But for the men involved, it wasn't a meme. It was an avalanche. Richard Sterling sat in the cramped waiting room of a regional cargo transport company in Slough, an industrial town miles away from the glamour of international travel. The leather seats and gold-trimmed cockpits of the Meridian 777 were a distant memory. Now he was surrounded by peeling paint and the smell of stale cigarette smoke. He adjusted his tie, which felt too tight. He had sold his Rolex last month to pay his mortgage. His wife had left him 2 weeks after the video went viral, unable to handle the public shame and the sudden loss of their income. The Pilot of the Year trophy he used to display on his mantle was now in a cardboard box in a storage unit he could barely afford. "Mr. Sterling," a young man with a clipboard called out. He didn't use the title Captain. Sterling stood up, forcing a smile. "Yes, that's me." He walked into the small office. The hiring manager, a gruff man named Henderson, had Sterling's resume on his desk. He also had a tablet open, playing a video. Sterling recognized the audio immediately. It was his own voice screaming at Elena. Henderson looked up, his expression unimpressed. "You've got thousands of flight hours, Sterling. You're rated for heavy jets. Technically, you're overqualified to fly cargo crates of frozen fish to Norway in a propeller plane. I just want to fly Mr. Henderson." Sterling said, his voice humble, lacking the booming arrogance it once held. "I'm willing to start at the bottom." "The problem," Henderson said, tapping the tablet screen, "is that we're a small company. We rely on trust. And the FAA report on your license, it's ugly, Sterling. Gross abuse of authority. Endangerment of passengers. The Aviation Authority suspended your commercial transport license for a year, and even now that you're applying for cargo, nobody wants the liability." Henderson closed the folder. "I can't hire you, Sterling. My insurers won't allow it. And frankly, after seeing how you treated that mother and baby, I don't want you in my skies." Sterling sat there, the rejection hitting him like a physical blow. "Please. I have nothing left." "You should have thought about that before you put those cuffs on her," Henderson said, echoing Elena's words. "Good luck, Mr. Sterling. Show yourself out." Sterling walked out into the grey drizzle of the parking lot. A Meridian air jet roared overhead, climbing into the clouds, banking toward a destination he would never see again. He watched it go, the realization finally settling in, that his wings were clipped forever. Across the ocean in New York, the karma had hit Charles Harrington with financial violence. When Elena Vance cancelled the Harrington Logistics contract, it triggered a domino effect. The morality clause she invoked was public record. Investors spooked by the sudden loss of their biggest client, and the viral video of their CEO drunkenly harassing a woman began to sell off their stock. Harrington had tried to do damage control. He went on talk shows claiming the video was edited, claiming he was the victim. It backfired spectacularly. Every time he opened his mouth, the stock dipped lower. 2 months after the flight, the board of directors held an emergency meeting. Harrington walked into the boardroom, expecting to bully them into submission, just like he used to. Instead, he found the room silent. "Charles," the chairman said, not looking him in the eye. "We've voted. You're out." "You can't fire me," Harrington roared, slamming his fist on the table. "I built this company." "And you destroyed its reputation in one flight," the chairman replied calmly. "We're filing for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection to restructure. The first step of that restructuring is your removal. Security is waiting to escort you out." Harrington was led out of his own building past the employees he had screamed at for years. None of them looked sad to see him go. As he stood on the sidewalk clutching a box of his personal effects, a taxi splashed a puddle of dirty water onto his bespoke suit. He looked around for someone to yell at, but there was no one left who cared to listen. While the villains of the story faced their downfall, Eleanor Vance was busy rebuilding. She didn't just fire the bad apples, she replanted the orchard. She overhauled Meridian Air's entire training program. The new motto plastered on the wall of the headquarters was simple humanity first. Service training now included mandatory empathy workshops. The VIP culture was dismantled. First class was still luxurious, but the rule was strict. Every passenger from seat 1A to 34E was a guest to be honored. 1 year later, Elena stood in the hangar of JFK, preparing to christen the newest plane in the fleet. It was a beautiful, gleaming aircraft. A crowd of employees and press had gathered. Elena took the microphone. She wasn't wearing a hoodie today. She was in a sharp, tailored suit, but she wore the same scuffed sneakers she had worn on that fateful flight, a reminder to stay grounded. "We learned a hard lesson a year ago," Elena told the crowd. "We learned that character is revealed not when we are comfortable, but when we think we have power over others. We are building an airline where kindness is the currency." She gestured to the crowd. and I'd like to introduce our new Director of Customer Experience, who will be ensuring that no passenger is ever unheard again." Sarah walked onto the stage. The young mother from seat 24B looked different. She was confident, smiling, radiating a strength that had been hidden by fear a year ago. She held the hand of her toddler, Leo, who was walking now. Elena had kept her promise. She hadn't just given Sarah a refund. She had given her a job. Sarah's background in social work, which she had revealed in their emails after the flight, made her the perfect candidate to overhaul the passenger advocacy department. "Thank you, Elena," Sarah said into the mic, her voice steady. "And thank you all. We're going to fly higher, not just in altitude, but in standards." The crowd applauded. Elena looked at Sarah, then down at little Leo, who was waving a toy airplane around. It was the perfect ending. The arrogance of men like Sterling and Harrington had been their undoing, crumbling under the weight of their own egos. But from the wreckage, something better had been built. A legacy not of money, but of respect. Elena looked up at the sky. It was clear and blue. "Cleared for takeoff," she whispered. And that is the incredible story of how one arrogant pilot and a rude billionaire lost everything because they judged a book by its cover. It's a powerful reminder that true status isn't about the seat you're in, the clothes you wear, or the title on your badge. It's about how you treat people when you think you have nothing to gain from them. Eleanor Vance didn't just win. She changed the game entirely. If this story satisfied your need for justice, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow and lets me know you want more stories like this. Don't forget to share this video with anyone who needs a reminder to stay humble and subscribe so you never miss a new upload. I want to know what you think. Do you think Captain Sterling deserved a second chance, or was his punishment exactly right? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.